So many words. So many Greek words. Why is this so hard? Oh, right, Liz, it's because you haven't made a video in like 4 weeks. Yep. I am rusty. I cannot even begin to tell you how many times I have had to say the phrase la dame et la... Can't even say it. Hi, and welcome to Liscapism. Thank you so much to Catherine and Alyssa, who sent cards to my P.O. box, a Hogswatch holiday card, and a postcard which depicts a detailed view of the famous tapestry La Dame et la Licorne. If you'd like to send something for this wall, my P.O. box is in the description. This is a continuation of my Medieval Kirtle project. I'm making a medieval gown and talking about different kinds of ways that you can conduct costuming research. Now it's time for medieval accessories. And when I say that, I mean a veil plus 2 different veil underpinnings, a belt, and a purse. For today's research theme, we're actually flipping the script a little bit. Instead of how research can improve your costuming, we're going to talk about how costuming research can improve your life in small but very satisfying ways. To that end, we'll talk about things like expressions, words, and stories which originate in the textile arts like weaving, sewing, spinning, but that we use in regular conversation today. We'll start with the veil. Women in the 14th century generally covered their hair. The reason and method depends on region, class, faith, marital status, and personal preference. My garment is intended for an upper middle class married white woman in Paris, so there was no legal or religious mandate in place, just social convention. I wanted a long-ish oval veil, and so following a guide from the incomparable Opus Elenae, which I will link below, I measured my head with a piece of string, cut an oval-shaped piece of fabric, and hemmed it. I feel almost silly going into any more detail. It's an oval piece of fabric that I hemmed the edges of with my rolled hem foot. Veiling continues to be a practice for many people around the world, for a similar variety of reasons today. The word and the object have both retained a fairly similar meaning throughout history. Obviously, context plays a part, but it's remained pretty consistent throughout that time. There are dozens of English words which have come from sewing, knitting, weaving, etc. that have similar lasting power. They're self-explanatory today because the meanings haven't changed much. Humans have always loved using familiar objects, ideas, or actions as metaphor. I like very much the idea that these objects that are familiar to me would also be familiar to somebody centuries ago, to the degree that we might use the same expressions and metaphors. Words like unravel, wind up, uptight, homespun, and literally any use of the word weave that doesn't refer to the craft, like weaving through traffic. You might not have known directly that these words came from weaving or spinning, but I don't feel like it would surprise anybody. A few turns of phrase in this category that I quite like are things like try it on for size and coming apart at the seams, and the most famous probably is finding a needle in a haystack, helpfully amended by blogger and memoirist Jenny Lawson. People who think that it's hard to find a needle in a haystack are probably not quilters. Needles find you. Just walk on the haystack for a second. You'll find the needle. This veil is going to need some underpinnings before I can attach it to my head safely, but for now, let's switch gears. We're going to talk about some more outmoded phrases and engage in a slightly more obscure craft. I wanted a belt for this kirtle, and I meant to sew a bit of fabric and maybe embroider it a little, but my mother was doing a huge clear out and gave me a giant pile of ribbon yarn in bright shiny colors. And this bastard, ever vigilant, decided that this was the perfect time to learn to tablet weave. So meet my improvised card weaving setup. This is the second tablet weave I ever did, the first being the day before, so please know that I'm fully aware of my lack of both proper technique and equipment, but this was just too much fun to pass up. So while I sink into an audiobook and attempt a craft with which I have no experience, let's talk about some words and phrases that have taken an extra leap away from their original meanings. We use them, and if we applied ourselves with some context clues, we could probably figure out their meaning, but they're not as obvious. Spindly. The spindle on the end of a spinning wheel is probably one of the only parts of a spinning wheel that I could actually identify without help. My guess is that this is due to the tale of Sleeping Beauty, who pricks her finger on a spindle and falls into a magical sleep. So even if we didn't know what a spindle is for, we can guess that it is a narrow and sharp object that can prick your finger. So when somebody is described as spindly, you can guess that they are tall and narrow, despite the fact that you don't know what a spindle is. Yarning, or to spin a yarn. This expression has fallen out of fashion, so for those of you who don't know, the expression means to tell a story.
I was yarning with young, McQueen in his compartment.
How long did you stay yarning after that?
Till 1:30. Well, it's what I call a 3-pipe yarn.
Frankly, the relationship between storytelling and textile arts is a very deep well of linguistic anthropology, but this specific metaphor has to do with the fact that yarn is long. Yarns are therefore usually long, sometimes involved stories. A long yarn can mean something akin to a big fish, meaning a story that is exaggerated or untrue. Dyed in the wool. We use this expression to mean a feature or trait of a person that is inherent to them, something that they are and have always been. Dyed in the wool refers to wool yarn that was dyed before being woven into fabric. Yarn dyed is actually still a feature that you can see on fabric labels. Even with no knowledge of textiles, I imagine that most people could make a logical leap and figure this out. As evidence of my inexperience at this particular craft, this lovely belt ended up being a little too small for its intended purpose. I'll make it into a strap for something instead. Our next category is words and phrases whose original meaning is obsolete or totally different today. And meanwhile, we'll be making a pocket, a purse, an aumônière. Now, before we talk about making a purse, I will humbly ask you to contribute to mine. I depend on contributions from my beloved patrons on Patreon, not only to keep making these videos, but recently now as my sole source of income. Before the new year, my unemployment benefits were exhausted, and I'm not currently able to return to work. I don't talk about my financial state much on YouTube because I'm continually torn between knowing that I have it better than a lot of people, and I also try to convey the degree to which your support actually helps me. To be frank, that tension is kind of meaningless because both of the statements are true and do not cancel each other out. If you aren't in a position to join my Patreon, know that you're in the majority and this message isn't for you. Please always continue to enjoy my videos for free as they are intended. If you can afford some support in this endeavor of mine, it would mean so much to me if you would become a supporter at the link below or in the card above. Thank you so much. Now let's make a silly little medieval purse. The word aumônière is a perfect representation for this category of more obscure word origins. It's a French word, so it already is inscrutable to Anglophones, but it originally referred to a purse for giving alms to the poor. But even by the 14th century, there is documentation that the word was becoming a term for any purse or pouch. I didn't really need a guide or pattern for this project, it's a simple drawstring bag, but I did look at some blogs and image sources to give myself an idea of the dimensions of the thing. I used a damask outer layer and a linen lining, and then added a leather patch on the bottom for reinforcement and decoration. I used some silver ribbon yarn for the side seams as a nod to my ribbon belt, now defunct in this case. I made the drawstring by finger loop braiding some of the other ribbon yarn. There are loads of words in English and other languages whose textile art origins are far too far from their current meaning to make that cognitive leap on your own. But we still use those words because that's how language works. Okay, quick, short, personal rant here to say that language is fluid and flexible and gooey and messy. The history of word meanings isn't straightforward, and trying to hold on to original meanings while ignoring the intervening cultural shifts is the worst kind of pedantry. I have been that person, and they are the worst. If someone says decimate, for instance, and you tell them that if they didn't mean 10% destroyed, then they are wrong, you're the worst. Go sit in the corner and think about what you've done. But the inverse is also true. If a word has a historical meaning which is harmful or hateful, and its meaning has been watered down with frequent or out of context use, you don't get to tell the people it harms that it shouldn't harm them anymore. If I have one more conversation with someone that includes the phrase, "What can I even say anymore?" I will sigh inwardly and continue to advocate for critical thinking skills to be an integral part of the public school curriculum. Anyways, let's talk about some of the words that have been on a journey through the muck and mire of the English language. Tease and heckle are both words that refer to processes in carding wool or flax for spinning. Personally, I might have gotten there with tease, but heckle is not a word I was expecting to be on this list. Both ingrained or in the grain and imbued are terms that refer to the state of wool being dyed before weaving, similar to dyed in the wool, see above. But because there is no mention of wool or dyeing in either of these phrases, they've lost that association entirely. On tenterhooks, meaning being tense and nervous, refers to the process of stretching newly fulled wool fabric on hooks to keep it from shrinking as it dried. The fabric would be very tense and taut during this process. The distaff side of a family means the mother side of a family. If you spin wool, then you might know what a distaff is. It's a tool for holding wool while spinning it, but generally speaking, that wouldn't necessarily help you to understand which side of the family would be referred to. Although, knowing that wool and weaving are pretty strongly associated with the woman in a family, that is a pretty strong link, but I don't think it's that intuitive. A similar word is spinster, meaning an unmarried woman. It's the same basic idea. Unmarried women often spun wool as a profession. Whether their marital status affected their profession choice, or whether their not marrying was due to their profession, is a chicken and egg history debate that I am not going to touch with a 10-foot pole. In good nick, meaning in good condition. There is a notch in a spinning wheel which holds a spinning axle in place. This nick is the crux of the machinery, and so to be in good nick meant on the right track or doing well. This is not something that I could have guessed in a million years. The word clue, meaning something that guides you to a solution, conclusion, or clarity, comes from a clue of yarn, or a ball of yarn. Where did the yarn come in? For that, you have to know a story. And our next category is stories, myths, and legends, which have spinning, weaving, or sewing as the central theme or activity. I'm going to get back to this, but in the meantime, we've arrived at the beginning again. I need some underpinnings for my veil. I'll talk about the St. Birgitta Cap first. The cap itself isn't so special in the story of St. Birgitta, also known as Bridget of Sweden, but an extant version of this headwear is believed to have belonged to her and is kept as a relic. This in itself is a kind of story, but not the one we're talking about today. There are several tutorials for this headwear, and I'll list them below. I used them all in some way or another to make this cap. Stories about weaving, sewing, knitting, embroidery, etc. are ubiquitous in almost every culture. For this part of the video, we're moving away from English and into the wider world, since the stories don't require specific language to talk about the crafts involved. There are too many stories of this kind, so I'm never going to get close to naming them all. I'm just going to take you on a journey through some of my personal favorites. From the Seneca people in northeastern North America, there's a story about a woman in a cave, sometimes it's the moon, who is continually embroidering with porcupine quills. Whenever she gets up to stir her cookpot, her dog pulls out some of her work. The legend has it that if the woman ever finishes her needlework, the world will end. From Tang Dynasty China, there is a story about a goddess, or fairy, who presents herself to a young man named Hang Guo. Her beautiful robe is seamless, and she explains that it is woven without the use of needle and thread, but entirely on the loom. The phrase, "a goddess's robe is seamless," became an expression meaning a perfectly conceived and executed plan. There are a huge number of European folk tales and fairy tales which feature weaving and spinning. The Three Spinners, Spindle, Shuttle, and Needle, Rumpelstiltskin, and the aforementioned Sleeping Beauty, to name only a very few. Many goddesses around the world are associated with weaving and needlework. In Scandinavia, for instance, the stars of Orion's belt are known as Frigga Rocker, or Frigga's distaff, due to the goddesses often being depicted holding a distaff and spinning. Now, back to that clue of yarn, by way of ancient Greece. The definition of clue is generally tracked back to the myth of Theseus. Theseus was an Athenian prince who defeated the Minotaur Asterion. Asterion was the half-bull, half-man at the center of an impenetrable maze in the kingdom of Crete. The maze was designed by Daedalus, the father of Icarus, of the story of a man who flew too close to the sun. If you think that this is already too complicated, then I don't think Greek myth is for you. Ariadne, a Cretan princess, falls in love with Theseus and gives him the ball of yarn to help him through the maze. He ties one end to the entrance so that after he defeats the Minotaur Asterion, he can find his way out again. The yarn was the way out of the maze. It was the clue to solving the maze. So that story, when recounted in English, is directly responsible for the word clue, and therefore the magnificent phrase,
"Communism was just a red herring."
I'll see myself out. Greek myth is replete with sewing and weaving stories. The Moirai, known better as the Fates, spin and cut yarns which represent the lives of mortals, cut short when they are cut. In the Odyssey, Penelope, the wife of Odysseus, is hounded by suitors who want to marry her, believing that her husband is dead on his way back from the Trojan War. Penelope fends them off by telling them that she will choose a suitor when she finishes the tapestry that she is weaving. She weaves every day, and then pulls out her work at night. I like to think that this stalling tactic is as much about the ingeniousness of Penelope as it is the incompetence of the suitors. Despite being in full view of the loom all day, every day, none of them detect this deception. In one story that is both epic and surprisingly subtle, Athena, a patron goddess of weaving, is insulted when Arachne, a human weaver, denies her skill comes from the goddess. They naturally hold a weaving contest. My favorite thing about this myth is that along with the skill of weaving, they also engage in a kind of sub-contest, where the subject matter of the tapestries are visual representations of boasts or insults aimed at the gods or mortals. It's like if you combined the ancient ritual verse contests like flighting or senna with a rap battle or the dozens. Arachne eventually wins, and Athena transforms her into the first spider, either out of pity or anger, depending on the version that you read. So this is also an etiological myth, because it explains the origin of a thing, the spider. Now, what does all of this, the words, the phrases, the stories, have to do with researching costumes? And why did I say that it would make your life better? Well, here's the thing. Sometimes knowledge is more roundabout than learning a fact or a skill directly. We don't always learn everything just by having a question and then looking for the answer. These word origins aren't going to necessarily make you a better costumer, and not knowing these word origins doesn't keep you from knowing what they mean today. I don't need to know what style of loom Arachne uses to be delighted by her superb throwdown in that story, but learning can give us a wonderful, more fully rounded knowledge and experience of life. Allow me to demonstrate with one last Greek myth, which is not about crafting, but is instead about a fillet, which is the last item that I am making. Just a heads up, this story does contain mention of an attempted sexual assault. I will describe it euphemistically, but if you'd rather not listen, the time code to skip to is in the description. This is the story of the conception of Erichthonius, the mythical founder king of Athens. One day, the god Hephaestus was overcome with lust for Athena and attempts to force himself on her. Athena has taken a vow of chastity and she rebuffs him. During this encounter, he accidentally spills his seed on her leg.
Oh, gross!
Disgusted by both the attempt on her virginity and the fluid, she takes her woolen fillet, wipes her leg, and casts it off Mount Olympus. It settles onto the earth, which is both literally and metaphorically the Earth Mother Gaia. She becomes pregnant and gives birth to Erichthonius, who Athena adopts. I have heard that story several times, and always understood it. There's nothing about that story which requires me to know exactly what a fillet is. All of the context clues suggest that it is a small cloth of some kind, and you really don't need to know anything else. I learned what a fillet was in the course of researching this costume, but even then I didn't link the two things in my head until I was rereading the myth in the past month, and it suddenly clicked. Now I have this lovely extra detail in my visualization of that story. The band around Athena's head symbolizing at that time her prowess in athletics and combat, a garment which she could possibly have woven herself with a beautiful pattern. Or maybe it is just a plain cloth, more practical and made beautiful by her heavenly head. I didn't go looking for that imagery, and I don't need it to appreciate the story, but it makes the story better and somehow more interesting to me. I feel a sort of kinship now, having had the opportunity to make and wear a fillet myself, though of a different time and use. And it, with all of the other accessories, are going to do a great job of making my medieval outfit more whole, rounded out, informed, and interesting. If you found this video informative and interesting, make sure to like and subscribe. Click the bell to be reminded when I release new videos, which is going to be hopefully every week, but no promises. There's a little bit of craziness right now. And in the meantime, have a great week, and I'll see you soon.